He's going to give me a 3-minute warning, and then I'm going to talk for another 15 minutes, right? Oh, okay.
3-minute warning.
Well, I'm really pleased with the title of the conference, Power and Promise, because I'm very optimistic today about what we can actually accomplish. And anyway, the areas I'm going to go and talk about is the sun, cattle, grass, and soil. But first, I always like to start with a question. How many of you are involved in farming? That's a trick question. I want all hands in the air. You're all participants. And that's a big part of my message, that you have the power to shift this thing. So anyway, I'm going to start. I tell people I learned to farm in the 1800s because I used to work at Old Sturbridge Village. That's actually me on top of the haystack. So we used to mow the hay by hand, and we'd put it in the ox cart, and we'd make the pile of hay. But we studied pretty intensively the agriculture of the 1800s. So we looked at the tax records. We learned about how much land people had. And this is the scene in the 1830s. In New England, about 80% of the land was open. 20% was wooded. Today, the ratio is about the opposite. But what I'm trying to do is get you to think landscape scale. Here in New England, 80% of the land was open, and it was being farmed. And the typical farm, you had about 100 acres, you had 4 or 5 cows, a couple oxen, maybe a pig, a handful of chickens. But the core was cattle. And what's interesting is that if you had this farm, your neighbor had a 100-acre farm, so you didn't have farmers selling a piece of meat to an individual. We all had meat, we all had milk. But this was a model that was based on solar, so when the grass grew in the temperate season, you would milk your cows and you would make cheese and butter. So everybody had cheese and butter. Again, we didn't go sell cheese and butter to our neighbor, but we did take the cheese and butter to the general store and trade for something we couldn't make or grow. And then the general store was the original aggregator. They took all the cheeses, put them in a barrel, put the barrel in an ox cart, and went to Boston to market. So there's a historic model of how farmers can get product to the market. It's very different than the farmer's market. Each farmer hands a piece of meat to an individual, but there's a historical precedent. Going forward from here, there is a great study done by Brian Donahue, who was one of the principal authors out of Brandeis. It's called a New England Food Vision. So they did a very careful analysis of what's grown in the Northeast and what could be grown in the Northeast. Right now, about 5% of New England land is used for agriculture. They're proposing and feeling it would be a good idea for closer to 15% of the land be trees cleared, cut down trees, that heresy, put it into farmland, and grow more food. Currently, there's 2 million acres in farming. They're proposing 4 million acres to go to farm, to become somewhat less dependent on our food coming across the Brooklyn Bridge. Not the Brooklyn Bridge, it's George Washington Bridge. So you all may not realize, but the vast majority of food coming to us has got to go through a couple of those bottlenecks that if something happened, we're in really big trouble. There's a few days' food here in New England. So their thought is that we should grow a lot more food. There's a lot of things we can grow in the Northeast. And one of the biggest ones, of course, is protein on grass. But just to shift gears and talk about industrial, commercial agriculture, which is where we are today in the whole country, this is a picture of what it looks like. We plow all this land, 97 million acres last year. And when you plow this land, you allow the carbon to oxidize and go off in the air. Plus, when you add up all of the fossil fuels which are used to do this process, to plow it, to plant it, to harvest it, to store it, to transport it, it's just it's a horrendous amount of carbon that gets put in the wrong place, comes out of the ground into the air. The net result of that is that we have this excess of corn. So what we do is feed the corn to cattle. Now cattle are ruminants. They have a 4-part stomach. They're not designed to eat corn. Now pigs and chickens are different. They're monogastrics. They have to have some kind of protein. But the cattle can live entirely on a forage diet. But what we do instead is we feed the grain. So this is a picture of a feedlot. Each of these pens has 100 or so animals, and there's many, many pens. So to zoom out on this a little bit, my contention is this is bad for the soil, bad for the climate, bad for bovine health, and it's bad for those of us that eat this meat. So if we zoom out a little bit, that's what it looks like. So these are the feedlot. This is the runoff of nutrients. So we've taken all Iowa and Indiana, grow the corn, truck the corn to the feedlot, put it into these animals, and here's all the nutrients concentrated in a place where they really are going to cause harm. If the lagoon breaks, they're going to pollute the Gulf of Mexico. So this is the net result of our industrial agriculture right now. And it's based on the industrial modality of plowing, planting, and the real crime is that we compromise the soil. One of the things I've been saying for a while is I could cure the flooding of the Mississippi, I could cure the drought in the West, and I could cure human obesity. You just have to give me the 3 states of Illinois, Iowa, and Indiana. Nobody's taken me up on it yet. But if I could take those 3 states, put a big herd of cattle on them, I could put that carbon sponge back into soil. So I've been saying that for a while, and this map came out. This map shows where food for humans is grown is where it's green, and places where food is grown for livestock and ethanol are red. So those 3 states, Illinois, Iowa, and Indiana, 97% to 100% corn grown to feed cattle and to make ethanol. So this is our breadbasket. This is our old prairie. This is the old place where we did have that huge 20-foot buffer of carbon, and we've put that carbon in the air, and now we grow corn, which really compromises the soil, allows the Mississippi River to flood. You know, along the lines of Dee Dee's percolation test, there's an NRCS agent in South Dakota that did a perk test. So you put a pipe in the ground on corn land, pasture land, which is extensive pasture land where you just put the cattle out and they walk on that same ground the whole summer long, and then the mob grazing, which we do. And then he measured how fast the water would go in. So on the corn land, it took 30 minutes for the water to penetrate. So you wonder why the Mississippi floods. It can't go into the ground. It's like a rock. Then he went over to the conventionally grazed area, put in his perk test, and the water went away in 7 minutes. They moved over to the mob grazed area, which is grazed the way we do, like the buffalo did, 10 seconds. So you want to hold the water. It really matters what your methodology is in terms of farming. And what we found is that we greatly increase the carbon plus the fertility when we graze. So this picture on the left is actually a farm that I farm in Massachusetts, East Quabbin Land Trust. And you see there's a stone wall. Well, I farm on this side of the stone wall, and my neighbor makes hay on the other side of the wall. And you can't see in this picture, but I'll show you in a second. The grass on my side of the wall is 4 feet tall. His is 2 feet tall. Here's a picture in South Africa. This is Ian Mitchell-Innes, who's one of my mentors, and this is his farm on the right and his neighbor's farm on the left. He mob grazes, the other people don't. Here's the picture that shows you on my farm. This is my grandson, Isaac. So here he is standing on my side, and there he's standing on the neighbor's. Same day, same soil, same sun, adjacent farms, separated only by a stone wall and management. So this is phenomenally different amount of biomass per acre inch. And what's fascinating is when we have this much biomass above the soil, we have an equivalent amount below the soil. So now I have my roots way down there, bringing up minerals from a whole different soil profile, not even talking about the density of the grass. I mean, he's holding a stick that we use to measure the density of the grass. It has little dots on it, so you slide it in the grass and count the number of dots. So on my side, we slid the stick in and we couldn't see the stick. So we have this incredible density of grass and a whole lot of it, simply by managing, simply by moving the cattle, what we say correctly. So this is the model, the buffalo or the model. So you have a big group of cattle, or buffalo. Buffalo are gone now, so we try and replicate the same thing with the cattle. What's interesting is our cattle are probably closer together than they are in the feedlot. The magic is that these guys are in motion. In the feedlot, they're parked for their whole life. So that's a big, big difference. But what we find is when we do this correctly, the cattle get tremendous energy from the grass, and as we move and the grass and the soil rests, it comes back phenomenally, as much as 2 or 3 times. And this is a picture from Christine Jones, who is, she's got a website. She was here at one of the conferences talking about carbon. So this is a picture, again, one of these side-by-side pictures. Same farm in Australia. The father passed away, left half the farm to one son, half the farm to the other son. The son on the left started rotational grazing. And this is 10 years later. He has created 28 inches of topsoil, again, on adjacent farms, different management. So this is the optimistic potential of doing this right, is to put down tremendous amounts of carbon, absorb the water, plus make great food, all in the same, all in the same model. So anyway, this is the part, this is what we really are doing when we graze correctly, is we're mobilizing this whole below the soil workforce. All the flora and fauna thrive in this environment. One of the things that's hard to understand when you see that industrial cornfield, I tell people once I drove through the Midwest all day, and it dawned on me after a while that something was very strange, because the corn crop had not been planted. But I was going through cornland, and the median strip was all green, and they're out mowing it with mowers. And in this cornland, which I drove through for 8-10 hours, there were no weeds. No weeds growing. You go to Manhattan, come to Boston, weeds come up through the macadam. Here's our agricultural breadbasket. The weeds won't grow. That's what we've done with the chemicals, industrial modalities. And what we've done is destroy this whole soil food web that all it needs is, it really doesn't need much. It will work, just as we let it work, if we don't destroy it. And if we enhance it with the mob grazing, it just comes on very rapidly. And this is Glomalin is an interesting thing. You can go on our website, you can read some more about it. But what it is it's a waxy coating to the soil aggregate, which really optimizes this whole process below the soil. A lot of people think when you graze, you put the grass and the manure on the surface, and that's the magic. What the real magic is the plant, the solar collectors, taking the carbon dioxide out of the air, making it into sugars, and putting it way down under the soil, away from the air where it can't oxidize in a stable form. This was discovered, guess when? 1996. We went to the moon, did all kinds of other highly technical things. This has been going on, but now we know a little bit about it. And that whole life below the soil is a real opportunity, optimizing it. So my whole thing is that to try and convince people that we need a paradigm shift. So all these things we're talking about are very true, very right, things we should do. But how do we get the shift to happen? How do we make that paradigm move? So my feeling is we could do right now. We have all this land that we could use for grazing, and we could still plant crops periodically once we've created that fertility with the grazing. But what's really interesting and what I feel is going to shift this whole thing is the market. And some people think that the market doesn't have much impact. I think it's got a huge impact, because I've been talking about this for quite a while, as people say, for about 15 years. And when I started, nobody knew what grass-fed beef is. Today, everybody knows what grass-fed beef is. And according to the statistics, today it's about 3 to 6% of the total market of meat, which is $95 billion. And according to Forbes, grass-fed beef has grown by 20 to 25% annually for the past 10 years and will represent 30% of all the beef produced in the next 10 years. So this is a huge change in the market. The market embracing this idea and then understanding it enough to make sure they're getting really 100% grass-fed beef and not grass-fed beef that's fed grain for the last 30, 60, 90 days of the life, which is what most producers of beef are going to suggest to you. And, you know, we have a situation where the mainline businesses are trying to get involved. So Hormel, the maker of Spam, bought Applegate. Applegate was an organic grass-fed product. And Hormel just stepped in and said, this is an interesting market. So my feeling is that we, with the market, can shift this thing fairly rapidly. And the advantage that we have, particularly in the Northeast, seeing as how we're mostly from Massachusetts, says I got 20 minutes left. 3 minutes, I'm almost done. So anyway, Northeast, we have water. As John said, water, dairy quality soils. Guess what? Proximity to the markets of the world. And we have plenty of beef cattle. Turns out, New England and New York produce 140,000 head of beef cattle, not dairy, just beef. These are USDA statistics. Average size herd is 40 head of beef. So all these cattle are already here in New England. The vast majority of them are collected by the cattle dealers and go west to those feedlots. So the cattle are already here. And our conundrum, our system is to take those cattle that are already here and finish them in New England, have them harvested in New England. This is our company is Big Picture Beef, and this is the concept. They will have calves from all these small farms. The real key to the grass-fed beef is finishing the cattle, making them fat on grass. That's where the real skill comes in. Many people have tried grass-fed beef because they know they should and had a very unacceptable eating experience. It was tough, it didn't taste good. I mean, there's a lot of meat out there that it's local, it's got all the right boxes checked, but it's not palatable. So to be palatable, it needs to be finished, it needs to be fattened. And to fatten it on grass, our concept is to take all these calves, instead of putting them on a truck to go west, that we'll aggregate them into a herd of 300 or 400 animals, like the buffalo, and we'll graze them. And we'll create a new class of agrarians, these grazers, who are going to live with these cattle and move them 4 to 6 times a day. And so we're working on that right now. But this is the story. You know, conventional, we're using fossil fuel, we oxidize carbon, we erode the soil, flooding a drought, nutritionally deficient. Not to mention, not even to begin talking about glyphosate and GMOs and antibiotics and hormones and all those other things. And here with the grass-fed, we have a totally animal solar-powered system. We actually sequester carbon while we're producing the protein. We build the soil rapidly, and we store water deep in the soil. We have this excellent food. So what did I do?
Escape. Ready to escape while you can.
So that's our new company, Big Picture Beef. And, you know, I leave you with this. Eating is an agricultural act. It's Wendell Berry's saying, I love it. And, you know, so there's your choice. And as you make that choice and spend your dollars, believe me, that will reverberate through the rural economy. It'll change this thing. So that's it.